Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu. Good morning, everyone. Today, we are from Group B3. We'll present about textual aspects in drama. And I will introduce my members first. The first one is Agung Putri Tarissa, 041, Sharon Ladisa, 047, Ridho Saputra, 048, Prativindhya, 049, and the last one is Viana, 054. This slide will be presented by my friend Ridho. Ridho, you may take your time.
Okay, thank you, Viana, for the opportunity. So I will explain the slide 1, text and theater. When one deals with dramatic text, one has to bear in mind that drama differs considerably from poetry or narrative in that it is usually written for the purpose of being performed on stage. Although plays exist which were mainly written for a reading audience, dramatic texts are generally meant to be transformed into another mode of presentation or medium, the theater. The main features in analyzing drama: first, information flow, overall structure, space, time, characters, type of utterance in drama, types of stage, and dramatic subgenres. Next slide, please. Okay, information flow. Since in drama there is usually no narrator who tells us what is going on in the story world, except for narrator figures in the epic theater or other mediators, the audience has to gain information directly from what can be seen and heard on stage. In comparison with narrative text, the plane of narrator or narrate is left out, except for plays which deliberately employ narrative elements. Information can be conveyed both linguistically in the character speech, for example, or non-linguistically, as in stage props, costumes, the stage sets, etc. Next slide, please. Amount and detail of information. The question concerning the amount or detail of information given in a play is particularly important at the beginning of plays, where the audience expect to learn something about the problem or conflict of the story, the main characters, and also the time of place of the scene. In other words, the audience is informed about the who, what, where, when, and why of the story at the beginning of plays. This is called the exposition. Transmission of information. Although in drama information is usually conveyed directly to the audience, there are instances where a mediator comparable to the narrator as far as information is concerned. The main function of this chorus is to introduce the audience to subsequent play. We learned something about the setting, about the characters involved, and about the tragic conflict. I think that's all from me. Thank you. I will give it back to Viana.
Okay, I will continue the presentation. Perspective. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Perspective. Introductory information and narrative-like commentary need not necessarily be provided by a figure outside the actual play. Perspective is the most important literary tool for writers. Choosing an effective perspective helps them create the right voice for their narratives. Dramatic irony. The way information is conveyed to the audience and also how much information is given can have a number of effects on the viewers, and they are thus important questions to ask in drama analysis. The discrepancy between the audience's and characters' knowledge of certain information can, for example, lead to dramatic irony. Number three, structure. Story and plot. As with the study of narrative text, one can distinguish between story and plot in drama. Story addresses an assumed chronological sequence of events, while plot refers to the way events are causally and logically connected. Furthermore, plots can have various plot lines. An example, different elaboration of parts of the story which are combined to form the entire plot. 390s. Other plays traditionally aim at conveying a sense of cohesiveness and unity, and one of the classical poetic laws to achieve this goal was the idea of the three unities: unity of plot, place, and time. Freytag's Pyramid. In his book, the German journalist and writer Gustav Freytag described the classical five-act structure of plays. He attributed a particular function to each of the five acts. The first one is contents all introductory information and thus serves as exposition. The main characters are introduced, and by presenting a conflict, the play prepares the audience for the action in subsequent acts. The second one usually propels the plot by introducing further circumstances or problems related to the main issue. In Act 3, the plot reaches its climax. A crisis occurs where the deed is committed that will lead to catastrophe, and this brings about a third peripety in the plot. The fourth creates due tension in that it delays the final catastrophe by further events. The fifth act finally offers a solution to the conflict presented in the play. Open and closed. Open and closed drama. While traditional plays usually, albeit not exclusively, adhere to the five-act structure, modern plays have deliberately moved away from this rigid format, partly because it is considered too artificial and restrictive, and partly because many contemporary playwrights generally do not believe in structure and order anymore. Another way to look at this is that traditional plays typically employ a closed structure, while most contemporary plays open, who distinguish between plays where the individual's acts are tightly connected and logically built on one another, finally leading to a clear resolution of the plot, closed form, and plays where scenes only loosely hang together and are even exchangeable at times, and where the endings does not really bring about any conclusive solution or result. This presentation will be presented by Prativindhya. Prativindhya, you may take your time.
Thank you, Viana. I will continue the presentation. Number four is space. Space is an important element in drama since the stage itself also represents a space where action is presented. The stage set quite literally set the scene for a play in that it already conveys a certain tone, such as one of desolation and poverty or mystery and secrecy. Actual production frequently event their own set independent of the information provided in a text. Thus, a very detailed set with lots of stage props might simply be used to show off theatrical equipment. Next slide, please. Word scenery. Since drama is multimedial, the visual aspect inevitably plays an important role. The layout or overall appearance of the set is usually described in stage directions or descriptions at the beginning of act or scene. Setting and characterization. The setting can be used as means of indirect characterization. A close look at the setting can thus contribute to a better understanding of the characters and their behavior. Next slide. Symbolic space. Another important factor to consider in this context is the interrelatedness of setting and plot. Obviously, the plot of a play is never presented in a vacuum, but always against the background of a specific scenery, and often the setting corresponds with what is going on in the story world. One can say that rather than only functioning as a background or creating a certain atmosphere, these spaces become symbolic spaces as they point towards other levels of meaning in the text. The setting can thus support the expression of the world view current at a certain time or general philosophical, ethical, or moral questions. Next slide. Number 5, time. Time in drama can be considered from a variety of angles. One can, for example, look at time as part of the play. On the other hand, time is also a crucial factor in the performance of a play. How long does the performance actually take? Needless to say that the audience perception of time can also vary. Next slide. Succession and simultaneity. One of the first distinction one can make is the one between succession and simultaneity. Events and action can take place in one of two ways, either one after another, or all at the same time. On the other hand, if no other indication of divergent time frames is given in the text, viewers normally automatically assume that the events and action presented in subsequent scenes are also successive in their temporal order. Presentation of temporal frames. There are a number of possibilities to create a temporal frame in drama. Allusions to time can be made in the characters' conversation. The exact time of a scene can be provided in the state directions, or certain state proof like clocks and calendars or auditory devices, such as church bells ringing in the background can give the audience a clue about what time is it. Next slide. Story time and discourse time. Duration. Another important distinction one needs to be made when analyzing time in drama, namely between fictive story time or play time and real playing time. The playing time of a piece of drama, of course, always depends on the speed at which actors perform individual scenes and can do vary significantly from one performance to another. Order. Above, the play starts at the beginning of the story and provides all the necessary background information concerning the characters, their circumstances, conflict, and exposition. In media res, the story starts somewhere in the middle and leaves the viewers puzzled at first. In ultimas res, the story begins with its actual outcome or ending and then relates events in reverse order, thus drawing the audience attention on the how rather than the what of the story. Plays which use this method are called analytic plays. Next slide. Frequency. According to Janet, there are three possible types of reference to an event. Number one, simulative. An event takes place once and is referred to once. The simulative representation of events can be found whenever scene in a play contains single action, and these actions are represented once. This mode is mostly found in linear plots, where the main aim is to delineate the development of a conflict. Traditional plays usually adopt this mode. Number two, repetitive. An event takes place once but is referred to or presented repeatedly. A repetitive representation of event is more difficult to imagine in drama since, strictly speaking, it would involve the same scene to be played several times in exactly the same way. While a complete overlap of scene is not feasible as it would probably cause boredom, especially modern plays frequently make use of the repetition of similar events or interaction or part of dialogue. The last one, iterative. An event takes place several times, but is referred to in the text only once. It Iterative telling occurs when characters refers to the same or similar events that have already happened. That's all from me. The next slide will be presented by my friend. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vika. So next one is character. The characters is a person, animal, being, creature, or thing in a story. Writer use characters to perform the actions and speak dialogue, moving the story along a plot line. Major and minor characters. Major characters usually have a lot to say and appear frequently throughout the play, while minor characters have less presence or appear only marginally. Thus, for example, Hamlet is clearly the main character or protagonist of Shakespeare's famous tragedy, as we can infer from the fact that he appears in most scenes and it's allocated a great number of speeches. And what is more, since even his name appeared in the title, he is the eponymous hero. Next is character complexity. Major characters are frequently, albeit not exclusively, multidimensional and dynamic around character, while minor characters often remain monodimensional and static. Flat character, see character dimension in narrative prose. Hamlet, for example, is marked by great intellectual and rhetorical power, but he also flawed to the extent that he is identified and passive. The audience learns a lot about his inner moral conflict. Next slide, please. Character and general tensions. According to Aristotle's Poetics, character in tragedies have to be a high social rank so that their downfall in the end can be more tragic. The higher they are, the lower they fall. While comedies typically employ lower characters who need to be taken so seriously and can thus be made fun of. Since tragedies deal with the difficult conflicts and subject matters, tragic heroes are usually complex. Next is contrast and correspondences. Character in plays can often be classified by way of contrast or correspondences. Representing corresponding character in such a contrastive manner, their individual characteristics are thrown into sharper relief and certain qualities are highlighted with regard to the overall plot. Next slide, please. Character constellations. Characters can also be classified according to their membership to certain groups of character, both across the entire play as well as individual scenes. In other words, questions like who belongs to whom and which character are friends or foes are also essential in drama analysis. Constellation can be based on sympathies and antipathies among characters, on how they act and react to one another. Usually, one can make the distinction between heroes and their enemies or protagonists and antagonists, and one can find characters who collaborate and support one another, while others fight or plot against each other. Obviously, character constellation is a dynamic concept since sympathies or antipathies can change and groups of people can also change. Next slide, please. Character configurations. The term configuration denotes the sequential presentation of different characters together on stage. Configuration thus change whenever characters exit or enter the stage. In the first scenes of Shakespeare Richard III, for example, Richard appears on stage alone first, followed by the entrance of his brother Clarence and Brackenbury with a guard of men, after whose exit Richard is on his own again before Lord Hastings joins him. Before the first scene closes, Lord Hastings exists and Richard remains once again alone on stage. Configuration typically underlie the overall structure of scenes, but as the example of Richard III shows, configuration can even change within scenes. Configuration are important to the extent that they show up, grow groups, and development among groups of character, which in turn is essential for the development of the plot. Technique of characterization. Characters in drama are characterized using various techniques of characterization. One can distinguish between characterization made by the author in the play's secondary text, authorial, or by characters in the play, figural, and whether these characterizations are made directly, explicitly, or indirectly, implicitly. Another distinction can be made between self-characterization and characterization through others. Explicit description of characters in author commentary or stage direction, telling names, authorial. Characters description of and comments on the other characters, also self-characterization, figural. Implicit correspondences and contrasts, indirectly characters name, authorial, physical appearance, gesture, and facial experience. It is a body language, mask, costumes, stage props, setting, behavior, voice language, style, register, dialect, topics, and discusses. It is a figure. Oh, and the next presentation will be presented by my friends Gung Tarissa.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So I will continue the presentation. Chapter 7, Types of Utterance in Drama. Dramatic language is modeled on real-life conversation among people. And yet, when one watches a play, one also has to consider the differences between real talk and drama talk. Dramatic language is ultimately always constructed or made up, and it often serves several purposes. It uses language in ways which differ from standard usage in order to draw attention to its artistic nature. Next slide, please. Monologue, dialogue, and soliloquy. Characters typically talk to one another, and the entire plot is carried by one conveyed through their verbal interactions. Language in drama can generally be presented either as monologue or dialogue. Soliloquies are mainly used to present a character in more detail and also on a more personal level. Hamlet's soliloquy reveals his inner conflict to the audience. The fact that he contemplates the miseries of life, death, and the possibility of suicide shows him as a melancholic, almost depressed character. This example illustrates one of the main functions of language in drama, namely the indirect characterization of figures. Asides. Asides are spoken away from other characters, and a character either speaks aside to himself, secretively to other characters, or to the audience. Elizabeth H. plays make significantly more use of asides than modern plays. The upfront stage, surrounded by the audience on three sides, makes asides more effective. Next slide, please. Turn allocation, stichomedia, repartee. In comparison to monologues and asides, dialogue is by far the most frequently used type of speech in drama. One can look at turn-taking and the allocation of turns to different speakers. The dialogue is marked by repartees, quick responses given in order to top remarks of another speakers or to use them to one's own advantage. Through the quick turn-talking mechanism, the dialogue appears livelier and it itself represents fast action. This reinforced by a number of word plays and rhetorical features which use the repetition of words and sounds and thus demonstrates how fatly connected the individual turns are and each turn immediately responds to the previous one. Next slide, please. The significance of wordplay in drama. The play with language entertains spectators and at the same time attracts and sustains their attention. Puns were also very common in Elizabethan plays and they were used both for comical and serious effects. The idea of wit, which combines humor and intellect, plays a significant role in the so-called comedy of manners. Wit is expressed in brief verbal expression which the intentionally contrived to create a comic surprise. Another concept to be mentioned in the context of play with language is wit. It was particularly popular in plays of the Restoration period, and the most well-known examples are William Wicks-Carroller, The Country Wife, 1675, and William Conrad's The Way of the World, 17. Next, please. Chapter 8, Types of Stage. Drama, just like the other genres, has undergone significant change in its historical development. This is partly attributable to the fact that stage types have also changed and have thus required different from of acting. Greek classicism. Ancient Greek drama was originally performed on special occasions like religious ceremonies and had a more ritual, symbolic, and also didactic purpose. Plays were performed in broad daylight, which made it impossible to create an illusion of real life on stage. The audience in ancient Greece consisted only of free men, slaves, and women were excluded. The Middle Ages, medieval plays were staged on wagons, which stopped somewhere in the marketplace. Close vicinity between actors and audience has to account for a way of acting which combines serious and funny scenes. Lack of clear boundaries between stage and audience again impeded the creation of a realistic illusion. Next slide. Renaissance England. The Elizabeth stage was an open-air theatre with no artificial lighting. The most common stage form in Renaissance England was the upfront stage, which was surrounded by the audience on three sides, since performance took place in broad daylight. The audience had to imagine scenes set at night. Restoration period. Theatre of the 17th and 18th centuries were considerably smaller than the Elizabeth theatre. They had around 500 people, and performance took place in closed rooms with artificial lighting. Plays had the status of culture event, and the audience was more homogeneous than in early periods, belonging primarily to higher social classes. Next slide. And the last one, modern times. Modern theater aims at creating the illusion of a story world as it could be in a real life. The modern stage form has not been able to fully accommodate the needs of more experimental plays. For this reason, we find nowadays a wide range of different types of stage, alongside the proscenium stage of conventional theaters. Next slide, please. So for this slide, we'll be continue with Ridho. Ridho, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Gung Tarissa. I will continue with chapter 9, dramatic subgenres. Based on the Aristotle's poetic, one distinguishes at least between two subgenres of drama, comedy and tragedy. Comedy typically aims at entertaining the audience. Tragedy tries to raise the audience's concern to confront. Both comedy and tragedy have, in the course of literary history, developed further subgenres of which the following list provides only an initial overview. Next slide, please. Types of comedy. High comedy appeals to the intellect, comedy of ideas, and has a serious purpose, for example, to criticize. Low comedy, greater emphasis is placed on situation comedy, slapstick, and fairs. A romantic comedy is where a pair of lovers struggle to come together is usually at the center. Satiric comedy usually attacks philosophical notion or political practices as well as general deviations from social norms by ridiculing characters. Comedy of manners is satirical in its outlook and it takes the artificial and sophisticated behavior of the higher social classes under closer scrutiny. Fairs typically provokes viewers to hearty laughter. Comedy of humors is based on the assumption that a person's character of temperament is determined by the predominance. Melodrama mixes romantic or sensational plots with musical elements. Next slide, please. Okay. Types of tragedy: Senecan tragedy, revenge tragedy or tragedy of blood, domestic Borges tragedy, and the last one is tragicomedies. Okay, I think that's it. Next slide, please.
Okay, that's all for the presentation today. Thank you for watching. I will end the presentation here. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi Santi Om. And good morning, everyone.